Summary: the video delves into the medieval mindset, focusing on the fears, superstitions, and beliefs that shaped everyday life during the Middle Ages. Without the scientific knowledge available today, medieval people relied heavily on myths, religious teachings, and imaginative explanations to make sense of natural phenomena and the unknown. The video begins by referencing the transition from the Roman Empire to the medieval period, highlighting how ancient philosophies like Aristotle's influenced medieval thought, particularly the theory of spontaneous generation, the belief that living organisms could arise from non-living matter such as dirt or decaying flesh. Despite the pervasive presence of death due to disease, war, and famine, people were not as fearful of death as modern societies might be. The infamous witch-hunting manual Malleus Maleficarum by Heinrich Kramer included bizarre beliefs, such as witches stealing men's penises and keeping them as pets, an example of the extreme and fantastical fears that underpinned witchcraft accusations. The church's teachings about the afterlife provided comfort, and churchyards were lively social spaces rather than solemn grounds. However, the fear of the dead rising as revenants or vampires led to unusual burial practices designed to prevent the restless dead from harming the living. These included binding bodies, decapitating them, or burying suspected vampires with sickles or stones to inhibit their return. This belief was widely accepted until the 17th century when scientific experiments disproved it. Medieval religious practices and societal norms also reflected these superstitions. For example, the barnacle goose myth suggested that these birds spontaneously generated from barnacles, a notion used by some to justify eating them during fasting periods, although this was later banned by the church. The video recounts strange medieval stories, such as the Wild Man of Orford, a hairy mute, merman-like creature captured and studied by locals, regarded as a supernatural being. Emotions, particularly crying, were perceived differently in the Middle Ages. Tears were seen as sacred and powerful, capable of spiritual cleansing and healing. Both men and women were encouraged to weep, contrary to modern Western perceptions that associate crying mainly with femininity. An encouragement of men crying, especially knights and nobility, contrasts sharply with contemporary Western notions of masculinity. This reveals a medieval cultural framework where emotional expression was linked to spiritual health and sincerity, showing that concepts of gender and emotion are historically and culturally contingent rather than fixed. Influenced by Aristotle and reintroduced classical knowledge, this belief persisted for centuries, demonstrating the slow evolution of scientific understanding and methodology. These rituals were practical manifestations of supernatural beliefs that sought to protect the living from harm. It also reflects the medieval blending of folklore, religion, and funeral customs, indicating a complex relationship with death and the afterlife. And early scientific ideas intersected to create a rich tapestry of cultural practices and worldviews. Understanding these elements helps modern audiences appreciate the complexities of medieval life beyond stereotypes of ignorance and darkness. The story of the Wild Man of Orford captures how medieval people interpreted unusual phenomena through a supernatural lens. The creature's portrayal as a hairy mute merman with no Christian faith reflects anxieties about the boundaries between the natural and the supernatural, and the unknown dangers lurking beyond civilized society. It underscores how deeply philosophy and religion could shape scientific thought before the modern scientific revolution. This not only demonized women, but also reflected societal anxieties about sexuality, power, and control. The fantastical nature of these accusations shows how superstition and fear were weaponized against marginalized groups, often with deadly consequences. In sacred places, medieval churchyards were hubs of social activity, including markets, performances, and even sex work. This demonstrates a pragmatic and less fearful approach to death, where the living and the dead coexisted in shared communal spaces. reflecting the church's influence in everyday life and social organization. Knights and even political figures were known to shed tears openly, which was seen as a sign of faith and sincerity. The church's eventual prohibition of this practice, despite the myth's popularity, illustrates the tension between folk beliefs and ecclesiastical authority, reflecting the church's significant role in regulating social norms and religious observance. The video also explores medieval attitudes toward death and the dead. Finally, the video touches on misogyny in medieval Europe, specifically through the lens of witch hunts. Overall, the video provides a fascinating look at the medieval world, showing how fear, superstition, and religion intertwined to shape daily life and cultural practices during this era. Highlights: the barnacle goose myth was used as supposed evidence for the virgin birth and to justify eating the geese during fasting. Medieval Europeans practiced unusual burial methods to prevent the dead from rising as zombies or vampires. Tears were valued as a powerful spiritual force for both men and women, symbolizing piety and emotional sincerity. The Malleus Maleficarum propagated bizarre beliefs about witches, including stealing men's penises to keep as pets. Spontaneous generation was a widely accepted medieval theory that living creatures could arise from non-living matter. The Wild Man of Orford was a legendary hairy mute sea creature captured and studied in the 12th century. The medieval mindset was deeply influenced by ancient philosophies, religious doctrine, and a lack of scientific understanding. Key insights: spontaneous generation reflects the limits of medieval science. Medieval acceptance of spontaneous generation highlights how early societies tried to rationalize biological phenomena without empirical methods. Religious doctrine shaped everyday life and even dietary practices. The barnacle goose myth is a prime example of how medieval religious interpretations influenced practical decisions like food consumption during Lent. Medieval emotional norms were more fluid than modern stereotypes suggest. The acceptance fear of the dead illustrates medieval beliefs about the supernatural and afterlife. The widespread practice of altering burial positions, decapitations, and placing objects on suspected vampires reveals a deep-seated fear of revenants and the undead. Witchcraft accusations were rooted in misogyny and fantastical beliefs. Heinrich Kramer, Malleus Maleficarum exemplifies how witch hunts were fueled by misogynistic fears and absurd claims, such as witches stealing male genitalia. Medieval legends mixed human traits with mythical elements to explain the unknown. Churchyards as multifunctional social spaces reveal different medieval attitudes toward death. Unlike modern perceptions of graveyards as solemn. The video offers a comprehensive examination of medieval thought, revealing a world where superstition, religious belief,